So I think companies in Malaysia should become global and regional champions. But my view, in a multipolar world, you want to future-proof your business, you need to hedge your bets. The way to do that is
This is the Game of Impossible podcast. My name is Leon and this is my dad, Idris Jala. We are a father and son podcast where we discuss all things transformation through the lens of business, leadership, sport, and faith. Today, I want to talk about future-proofing businesses, future-proofing your plans at large, whether you're in business, whether it's future-proofing your own personal pursuits. How do we do that? How do we make sure that as we're doing it, we have a clear sense of what we are doing, why we're doing it, but also making sure that we are preparing the next generation well for things that might come. Changes that lie ahead, shifts in terms of global powers as well. How do we future-proof ourselves and our businesses? One of the things that you talk about, Dad, is having a clear sense of why, a true north, if you like.
Yeah.
So maybe let's start by talking about maybe some general practices before we go into maybe some things that you're observing as far as macro trends go. But maybe let's start from the point of true north. How do we make sure that we are able to set a vision or a true north that lasts?
It all begins by setting up impossible targets, impossible true north. That means set a target that the organization believe or the people in the organization believe that they cannot achieve it based on the current way of doing it. So therefore they have to innovate and they are forced to find a new way how to do it. That's the starting point. So setting the true north to be an impossible target at the starting point. When you have done that, the one thing that you cannot do is to allow complacency to set in. You cannot allow things to just drift and be business as usual. So that's the starting point. The second thing you need to do is you need to look at what's called trends. What are the things happening around? The further the horizon is for you to think about it, the bigger the trends, the patterns of things you're looking at. It's called mega trends. So these are very important things. Why are trends important? Because trends are like signposts along the road towards a future. And you are looking at those trends that will tell you about where is the future leading you, the world going through. And so the patterns of things these are the signposts. After you've seen many of them, you probably discover that there are two competing forces that shape the future, normally about two main forces that shape the future. And you then ask the question, these two competing forces that shape the future, what is the likely scenario for the world and for the business and for the industry that you are working in? And that will give you scenarios. Normally, when I was in Shell, we used to do that a lot of time. We have group scenario planning team. They do nothing else but look at signposts, look at trends, and then they forecast the future. You're looking at two competing forces, and then they come out with it. And the example in the year 2005, Leon, Shell group planning scenario team, they came up with scenario says, in the next 20 years, they said, this is 2005, in the next 20 years, the world will go through two competing scenarios, which are, number one scenario is called open doors. The countries open doors and allow globalization to take place. A lot of people will open and liberalize the economy. So this is the way it works. And the other one is called flags. Flags meaning to say that advent of nationalism. People want to retreat away instead of the global world. They want to nationalize it. So these are the two competing trends. The prediction in Shell in the beginning was, it starts with, in the year 2005, in a few years, it will remain as flags. 5 years later, the prediction was, it will go into more or less competing equal trends between flags as well as open doors. And then for the next 15 years or so, the prediction is it will go through open doors. when you look at it today, we are in the year 2025. It just dawned on me, everything that was predicted in that forecast was correct. You see, Donald Trump has been elected. MAGA. MAGA is really a signpost that tells you that they want to retreat to make America great again. They want to then control this idea of offshoring their factories, bringing them back. So this is exactly flags. So you can see what Shell had predicted in 2005, it come to roost. Now, I mean, when you think about these competing scenarios, when you're in place on it some probabilities. What's the probability in the next 20 or 50 years? Let's think about it today. What's a likely scenario that's going to happen? And that's very important. But you can only come with the scenarios if you understand the mega trends. So it's important to first understand the mega trends.
And it's also important to draw a distinction between a true north and yearly goals.
Yeah.
Because yearly goals are going to be subject to change, subject
Correct.
to changes, as you mentioned, shifts in global powers, shifts in the economy.
Yeah.
But I think what we're saying is that there are obviously going to be changes in the mix.
Yeah.
So the point is to, first of all, set a true north that can be able to withstand some of these changes, but having goals that might shift according to those changes. Now, let's talk structurally in terms of then future proofing. If we have a clear sort of goal or clear true north, then what are things that businesses can put in place operationally in terms of systems that can help to make sure that the business can sustain and weather different storms, different outcomes?
So let's just take an example of a company X. Let's suppose this company X is a kind of it's a publicly listed company in Malaysia, and it's got many different interests. But then you look at trends. As I said, what are the mega trends that the world is going through? One clear trend everybody know about this. United Nations and World Bank, everybody predict this. Demographic shift, population change. Today, the population of the world is around 8.2 or 8.3 billion people. By the year 2075, that means 50 years from today, the prediction it will grow to 10.3 billion. And so of that, the single biggest growth in population actually come from the continent of Africa. Both China and India, the most populous countries in the world, will remain stagnant. And so by that time, Africa, the continent of Africa, will have 1/3 of the whole population. The 10.3 billion out of Africa altogether, 32% will come from Africa because they are still growing as a population. Another thing, the demographic shift is that most of the Western world are entering an aging society. So for a business that has healthcare, if you are doing that, you need to think about how to pivot your healthcare business more towards seniors living. How to then take care of all people. This is a very important thing. So Malaysia will go through it. Already Singapore is already an aging society. So I think if you are in a healthcare business, you need to think about shifting your business so that it deals with healthcare for the old people. And that is a very important example. But I mean, population, and there is tremendous demand for all sorts of things in Africa because the population is growing. And to my mind, if everything works out well for Africa, there's tremendous opportunities there in Africa for the next 50 years or even 100 years. I personally believe, Leon, that if Africa get their act together, they will be the center of civilization in the next 50 to 100 years because of the what's called demographic dividends coming from the fact that they are a young population and they have lots of mineral resources available at their disposal and lots of things, but they need to get their act together through leadership. So that's one example. You can also talk about climate change. Everybody in the world is talking about climate change today. If you are a company that let's say in energy business, I really encourage that company to pivot towards renewables. Really need to go down that path. Malaysia as a country, we talked about it many times before. I have no doubt that Malaysia must go head on to implement their national energy transition roadmap. That's a very good document, by the way, but it tells you there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So for businesses and for government, I am totally convinced that Malaysia must go through a plan to introduce nuclear energy because it's cheaper and it's cleaner. And so in the next 50 years, I also believe that by that time, hydrogen will become commercially viable. But I do not believe that organizations should spend their time in Malaysia spending money on R&D because there's a lot of money to be spent. So I think that's not for gifted amateurs. I think you should let the more deep pocket companies go and do the R&D. Once the technology is mature, then you become a quick adapter and follower to try and do that. But the third biggest mega trend is without doubt is AI and technology. So quantum computing is here to stay, Leon. There's so much things that will happen today. And there will be new vaccine. I believe in the next 50 years, because of AI, the rapid work that's being done on the research and development and clinical trials, there will be a cure for cancer. And I think there will be a cure for Alzheimer's too.
Since you're talking about that, I want to ask you, and this is pertaining to your role in Sunway, because in the Sunway group, you're covering so many different industries, all of which actually run the risk of potentially being swept up by the winds of change. So you mentioned AI, for example, and its impact on healthcare. Obviously, with your Sunway hospitals and the healthcare side of the group, what are some ways that the group is looking to future-proof?
Well, this is exactly timely because this year, Sunway has just reached 50 years old. So we celebrated 50 years anniversary this year. And this year, we also decided to hold a leadership conference to then ask the question, now that we have grown from 100,000 ringgit paid up capital company to where it is today, such a huge, one of the big conglomerate in Malaysia, what are we going to do for the next 50 years to grow? Obviously, we set big, ambitious targets, very big targets, the true north. Then we look at the trends. We believe that all these opportunities are definitely abound there. One example is real estate. Because I talked about Africa, I encourage the team, and also we challenge the team to look at the opportunity in Africa for, why don't we look at our smart city and then franchise it so that you replicate that in big cities in Africa, where there's hospital, there is malls, there's hotel, there's university, just like the one we have here in Sunway City. And that's opportunity in Africa, big time opportunities in Africa. But
the proof is in the pudding, right? I mean, with all the consulting work that we're doing, the bulk of our international consulting work is in Africa.
Absolutely. And the other one that I know for sure is that because we have a big construction arm in Sunway, I see the opportunities, without doubt, in my view, for the African continent to wake up and take its place in a prominent spot in the world economy. They must come up with modern infrastructure on a pan-African basis. What I mean by that is this. Pan-African railway that connects some of the major cities among the whole of Africa.
Right.
Pan-LNG pipelines. A lot of PEN activities, that means PEN nuclear energy that provide energy for everybody, not just one state or another, because they are all within one continent.
Why do you think that isn't already happening?
And what that's today, that's people are drifting. To my mind, when you look at China...
Is it a nationalistic thing, or is it just because of...
Nationalism. Flags. A lot of flags. So I think if you compare, this is Africa, and you then make some parallel with China. China went through a big explosion growth, and then through desperation, because poverty is so rife, and they reach a point of desperation. when the systems break down, there's so many poor people that are there, then you run into tremendous difficulties. In Africa today, Leon, the official statistics that they have in Africa is that, let me look at some of the numbers. About 67% of the people living in Africa are living in extreme poverty, according to the World Bank's Poverty, Prosperity and Planet Report in 2005. This is sub-Saharan Africa. That means 67% people living in the world, they're actually in sub-Saharan Africa. So I believe, if you think about it, either Africa wake up as a continent through enlightened leadership, or they wake up to this through desperation. And so you can see in the case of China, Mao Zedong realized that they were in a desperation. And so he then started to step up and said, we're going to go through this. So they went through a very, very difficult time as they were doing. There is no breakthrough without breakdown. I believe it will be the case. Youth unemployment is rife in Africa, with poverty going on like this and the population growing. Already 67% of extreme poverty. What that means, Leon, is this. In real terms, it means a family has altogether US dollars 1.9 US dollars income per day. This is extreme poverty.
That's right.
And so when you reach 3.2 billion people and 67% of them are in this condition, you will reach a point of desperation. And I hope that the leaders in Africa wake up much earlier through enlightenment in leadership. Instead of waiting for desperation to set in, take the inspired leadership approach and do it now.
Yeah, and it's definitely possible, because looking at the poverty rates in, we don't even have to look that far back. I mean, this is in the 1990s. 1990s, 60 to 65% of those in China were living in extreme poverty versus 55% in Africa. So actually a lot more poverty, a higher percentage of people in extreme poverty in China at that time. And yet look where they are today. And so, obviously that means that it is possible for Africa. What do you think might be the edge that, let's say, Africa has as a region versus China?
One is that they are full of natural resources, and they have tremendous land that is fertile and flat land ready for agriculture. And so I did some quick estimation, Leon. If you take a look at Africa, total Africa land size is 30.37 million square kilometers. That's the size of the whole continent of Africa. And if you look at some of the major countries like Tanzania, they allocate 40% of their land for what you call conservation and for safari and etc. And some other countries who are moderate like Kenya, about 10%. Let's take on an average 10 to 20% of land that is currently reserved for animals, for safari, etc. And if you take half of that to deal with these poor people that are living in abject poverty, and you apply modern farming to it, that I would say, that size that you're talking about, if you take half of that, let's say the total 4 million square kilometers, you take half of that, you only take 2. That is 6 times the size of Malaysia, So if you apply the Israeli method of modern farming, all they need to do is, there are many, many lakes in the continent of Africa. Lake Tanganyika, for example. Learn from the Dutch, build the dikes during the rainy season, keep the water at high level there. Learn from the Jews how they use drip farming into farming. The land, the fertile land, is flat land, it's perfect, absolutely perfect for doing modern farming. Then you can feed the 67, percent of the poor people that are living there. I know there is a lot of people that will argue this land is meant for the animals, but all I'm saying is that we take half of the land for feeding those people who really have nothing to eat.
Right.
And so at least we leave half for the animal to roam around. So I'm not taking all of it, half of the land. So among people will argue this. Most people will argue, oh, we don't have money to do all this modern farming. Frankly speaking, you don't need government to have money. You know what they need to do? Concession. So they simply say, this area here, we are now giving it a concession. We invite private sector from anywhere in the world that will do proper modern farming here, and then we would do joint venture. The government give the land and has an equity. The foreign companies will bring in modern farming. So this joint venture between the government, and that's how you feed the poor people. So I totally believe that if you ask me today, the joke that you and I have is that, where do you think the Garden of Eden was originally put? I am totally convinced that it is in Africa. Because if you go to the safari, the animals are just roaming around in millions of them. And you don't have to feed them, they're just there, And so the land is fertile. All they need to do is irrigate it and put modern farming. So I don't think there are many places in the world that is well endowed as Africa. In my view, that place is so well endowed, the tremendous opportunity. I believe if they get the act together, starting with what the Chinese have done, modern infrastructure. That's why today, the rails in infrastructure, the high-speed rails in China, is no one in the world can compete with the way they do it in China. Their irrigation system, the canals, the hydropower that they put there, it's massive. So that's what you need. You need all of that to happen in Africa. So I'm totally of the view that I would say Africa in the next 20 years is the growth frontier. So if you want to grow as a company, please look very closely at opportunities in Africa. But that's a long drawn thing. But you need to start now. If you start believing in the next 50 years, that's what you intend to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's even there's an actual, you mentioned in passing just now about the Garden of Eden potentially being in Africa. I mean, if you look geographically, Cush is often cited in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And Cush is believed to be, identified as being within the sort of Sudan, even Ethiopian regions. So I think there's definitely a case for the fact that actually Africa was not just on the periphery, but actually very much central to civilization as we see in the Bible, in other Abrahamic faiths as well. And in fact, even from a Christian lens, we are actually seeing that the future of the church seems to be very much African. I mean, just also partly by virtue of population size. But that actually raises a question. Since we're talking about population, do we think that is going to be a challenge for them? I mean, obviously, China, one of the things that they did was they decided to start to moderate their population growth. And obviously, that was helping them, to make some per capita improvements. But I wonder for a nation like Africa, does that become a challenge, even if they were to do some of these things, this more pan-African approach, but with increasing population size, will that hinder growth?
Yeah, the challenge is out there. But as I said, there's also the opportunity in that challenge. I like to see the opportunity rather than the challenge. The challenge will always be there, but you must look at the opportunity that
this is a generalization, but you could argue that maybe the Chinese culturally are maybe a little bit more predisposed to being slightly more transactional in nature versus African culture. So I wonder whether something like that to control population would be harder to implement.
I mean, surely they have already been implementing this. Most governments have birth control. But it didn't work.
But not as hardline.
It's not really
China
happening.
was very hardline about their birth control.
Very hardline. But, it's not happening in Africa. So, but I suppose in the case of China, they did that because they went through desperation. You need to go through a desperation to be able to do that. That's what they did in China, and because there's so many people that were in extreme poverty. To be clear, Leon, the statistics is in our lifetime, China is the only country in the world that has lifted 800 million people out from extreme poverty. They the only country that know how to do it. So if Africa wants to know how to do it, take a leaf from China. No other country has been able to lift 800 million people out from extreme poverty. That's the only country in our lifetime we can take a leaf from. I can tell you the answers are quite clear. You must build modern infrastructure. Pan China. Do the same thing for Africa. Don't just talk about railway within one country. It's the whole continent. All the modern infrastructure. Then you can focus on farming, modern farming. You use the modern farming, then you bring in the livelihood of those people. Focus on food. Food is very, very important. Then education. Make sure the education is there. Why did I say infrastructure? Because it's the bedrock for growing the economy. You know, when we were doing some work in Tanzania some 7 years ago, we had a lab on agriculture. It was very clear that there was enough maize that was available, harvested every year, enough crops was harvested every year, but many of them, they cannot bring them to the market, for the whole of Africa. Some countries in Africa needed the maize, but there was the logistics arrangement to bring it there wasn't there. There was not enough warehouses to keep them as well. So the maize, they've gone to waste. So all the simple things that we did was, we made sure that there was enough warehouses that were built there. In fact, I was in Boston just 2 days ago. The former president Kikwete was there. He announced to everybody that because of the work that was done 5 or 6 years ago when he was there as a former president, and PEMANDU, we assisted them on this lab in agriculture, they are now no longer a net importer of food. They are a net exporter of food. They were a net importer before in Tanzania. Yeah. This is wonderful. And so quite a populous country. Once you make the simple steps, it's almost like acupuncture. You put the very simple interventions there, you will see progress being made there. But for the whole continent of Africa, they need to go and do this as a continent now. That's without doubt in my view. So the markets are all there, but the logistics need to be sorted out. And the logistics cannot be sorted out without modern infrastructure. Rail is very, very important, and highways and roads. And a lot of them, when I talk to quite many of the leaders there, they're saying, you know, Idris, we don't have the money to build those highways. I told them, if we in Malaysia waited to have the money to build our highways, our toll roads wouldn't be there. What did Mahathir do? I give him credit for it. To me, Mahathir should be labeled as the father of modern Malaysia in terms of infrastructure. He is a guy that believed that we must not wait for the country to have enough money to build the highways. He then gave concession under PPPs, private-public partnership. All the government need to do is allow the private sector to build highways, install tolls, whoever use it, pay tolls. And that's the only way you can do it. So you don't need to wait in Africa for the government to have enough money to build the highways. Do exactly as we did. And they can build them today. There are so many companies that would do it.
What do you say to then the detractors who would argue about setting up a culture of cronyism?
Now that is the key. The beauty today is that we have altogether about 27, if my last count, toll highways in Malaysia. 70% of the power generation in Malaysia is under IPP, Independent Power Producers. There are all sorts of contracts. The way to prevent cronyism is to do this. Two things you need to do. Take a look at the best practices of the contracts on PPPs, which is called public-private partnership. Look at Singapore model, how did you do it? Look at Malaysia, look at South Korea, look at other countries that have done. Lay the contracts on the table and take the best example where the private sector don't have exorbitant profit. Reasonable profit, but they don't carry too much risk as well. You don't want them to carry too much risk. And the government then can see this to be fair and square. Then when you know that, then you then go to second thing, open tender. Open tender. Don't go through negotiated individual bidding. No. Open tender. Make it transparent to public. Declare the winner. These are the criteria. These are the best practice contracts. You bid according to these contracts. If you win it based on this contract, you then have the deals. So it's not difficult, Leon.
Yeah, you referenced Philip Yeo in the past.
Yeah.
And his sort of gunslinger way of doing things, being in many ways, the very driver to Singapore's growth and development. Now, taking that same mindset, well, then does kind of open tenders and this way of doing things properly go against that? If we were to say, let's try to be a bit more like Singapore and build quickly.
Their approach was, although the gunslinger approach that Philip employed, he was basically saying to the private sector, you come to us and all of you can come to us. Any one of you that has a very good proposal for how we want to develop, let's say, the Batam project, the Jurong project, the island. You come to us, the ideas with the best bids. When we like your idea, based on our criteria, we then work with you to do it. So it's like open door, rather than closing door and say, I choose this and I choose that. Say, for example, I was in Shell before. Shell came out with a proposal. This is what we want to do. We want to build X and Y and Z refineries. They said, okay, we like your proposal. This is a multinational. So this is no cronyism of Lee Kuan Yew and Philip Yeo. They said, okay, we like what you guys do. Your proposal, great to us. We'll work with you to do it. So your starting point is open tender, open invitation.
You still make it open.
Yeah.
But you encourage speed and expediency in the decision making process.
Yeah.
Speed versus using an open tender as an excuse to delay and to be slow about how you select and how you discern. I'm curious, we're talking a lot about Africa being the future. If we assume that to be true, what are some things that Malaysia can do, whether it's Malaysian companies, our government even, to be able to prepare ourselves for that eventuality?
Well, today, Leon, the world is shifting into what's called a multipolar world. No longer a unipolar world that is with US hegemony. So you will see in this multipolar world, the superpowers, if you use that word, US will remain there, China is there, EU is without doubt there, India will be there, and Russia and some other countries may appear also on the horizon. So what you need to do is, in Malaysia, companies in Malaysia must look at this and say, what do I need to do in terms of growing my footprint globally? So I think it is very important for Malaysian companies to think about, in a multipolar world, to say that diversification. Don't put your eggs only in one basket.
Yep.
Don't go and do trade and investment only with USA. So maybe you can say for digital, you can do your trade and investment or digital just with USA. But for infrastructure, let it be China. And so then you are spreading your risk around. So I totally believe that in a world where there is lots of tensions like that, diversification is the way to go, in my view. So when you start doing that, you will not be forced by those countries to make choices. They will force you, do you come to team A or team B? No, we're picking issue by issue. And then we say, for this, we do that, for this. So I think companies in Malaysia should become global and regional champions. Take the opportunity to do that. But my view, in a multipolar world, must go through diversification. For energy, diversify your energy source. For supply chain, diversify your supply chain. That logistics, you cannot just put everything in China. You must diversify. And then you must also diversify your trade and investment flows. You need to diversify that so that you are then hedged. To use your word before, you want to future-proof your business, you need to hedge your bets. The way to do that is to diversify in a multipolar world, because of the possibilities that there will be some tensions between them, and then therefore this is the only way you can do it. When you start doing this, then I think you can grow. You make use Malaysia and ASEAN as a platform to grow regionally and to grow globally. This is, to my mind, is the way to go. lah.
Let's talk about some ways in which this is working out. So I think maybe for PEMANDU, it's a bit easier for us to do this because the nature of our business is that we're in consulting. A big part of our mix is doing government consulting. So we naturally have an international presence. I would say we're quite heavy in Africa, but we do have work in other regions as well, thanks to our partnership with Cordance. But I'm curious for Sunway Group, then what does that diversification look like for you guys?
Well, construction, we need to go abroad and do construction in many of these countries. Growth opportunities in Africa. All the PEN things I talk about, PEN Rail, PEN IPPs, all of that stuff. And also our Bandar Sunway franchise that so that we can build many new townships, the smart cities within many other countries in the world. That's tremendous opportunity.
Yeah, you basically got a blueprint already for how to build not just a development but an entire township. So essentially replicating that globally.
But then because we have hospital, we need to start turning our hospital to become the hospital of the future with AI. And this is very, very important. And so when we start to make the changes there, it's called deep verticals. From end to end, for the whole healthcare, you need to embrace digital, the entire thing. So there's everything that can be done there. I am totally convinced in the next few years, because of the power of cloud computing and technology that's available, digitalization, and that you will find doctors and specialists globally, they're all part of a conglomerate, virtual. So you can put all the information required, the blood test and everything. The doctor sitting there in Calgary is the one that provide the input. He don't need to stay in our hospital. This is called a distributed model of having hospital. That's a global virtual hospital where the doctors reside globally. They don't need to sit in the Sunway hospital. They can sit anywhere in the world. As I mentioned before, in Inspire, they were here, the Chinese were here. They were already talking today about an orthopedic surgeon looking at the computer, making the instruction on the computer, but the robot is actually doing the orthopedic surgery in Beijing. They're already doing that now. But the man was saying, that the chairman of Inspire, he's saying that the only reason why we have the doctor sitting out there is because we don't trust the robot 100%.
Yeah.
That's why the guy is guiding the robot on a computer in Shanghai when the orthopedic surgery is actually taking place in Beijing. So you can see, you can have a virtual hospital. So this is the way forward. As I said before, the future of the ambulance will be drones. So you don't have to have a bus that go to the accident site to pick the people that are injured there. You send a drone there and to pick and bring to the hospital. There's so many things that can be done. I'm totally convinced that the future, that there will be so much power in quantum computing that people will then be able to look at real-time data to predict before the symptoms arrive that you will have a particular kind of illness that will come to you. And so they will then begin to make the interventions long before the symptoms arise. That's, you talk about it in future, this will happen. For sure, in my view, this will definitely happen because
I mean, you already have a lot of the basic building blocks for it because we are in the age of wearables. You know, you've got little health bands like this, like a Whoop, or recently Meta just released their new Meta glasses. You know, so you've got so many different devices now, different means of capturing maybe some of that data. I guess now the question is more in the area of software. How do we make sure that we're programming these things to catch those symptoms, those different signals, if you like, and then to be able to package the reporting to give you a proper analysis, a proper diagnosis, making sure the diagnosis and all are accurate as well and have gone through the necessary approvals. But I think if you just look at the hardware alone, that future doesn't seem very far away.
Yeah. In our university, in Sunway University, we're really embracing AI. To really embrace AI, what we can do with AI and with modern technology to really bring the university to world class in many, many aspects of it. And so we're challenging ourselves to do that. So Sunway University is tied up with Arizona State University because they are able to produce thousands and thousands and thousands of graduates in classes because online studies plus hybrid, the method in which they were teaching the subjects through structured pedagogy using technology. And that's the collaboration we have with Arizona State University using their platform, their education platform to go and do this. But there's tremendous opportunity for doing it. The famous world economist Jeffrey Sachs, we have a Jeffrey Sachs Development Center here, Center for Development Studies here in Sunway. And we were just talking to him. He said, look, Idris, I have many, many friends who are really knowledgeable in this area. We will be very, very happy. They will be very happy to then be able to share their insights and teach at our center if we improve the platform, education platform, so that they can teach all the way from
Virtually.
USS.
Yep.
They don't have to fly here. And so today he flies here twice a year to lecture at our university. You don't need to do that. You can do much more frequently. So I think if we can do that, we are right now as we speak, we developing the entire methodology, the pedagogy for doing that, the platform for doing it, and so that we can then really expand it and then much bigger reach, actually improve the quality as well.
To one final thing to close is, as people are looking at different shifts, anticipating different things that lie ahead, how do we prioritize the change that will be necessary? Because not all change is necessary.
Correct.
There can be the temptation to want to change 101 things in your team, in your organization. How do you know which is the right thing to change?
That is absolutely spot on question, Leon. I'm glad you raised it because you must anchor everything on true north. Once you, right at the beginning when we started, we talked about you must determine where your true north is. The measure must be made clear. When your measures are made clear, and the target is impossible target, everything that will contribute towards a target are your priorities, your focus. Everything that don't, those are the things that are distractions. There are many things that will seduce you, that you get excited to work on, but if they don't contribute significantly towards your true north, then they're not priority. You have to be ruthless to put them aside. So that is the framework. Starting point must be the true north. And that is how you then look at the opportunities available, size them. So if you look at it, if you say the true north measure is only two things: revenue growth, profitability. Because if you're profitable, you have enough revenue, you can do many things to improve the quality of your service to your customers because you have the money to do it. And at the same time, you can pay your staff as well because you have the money to pay them better salaries. So everything is good. The customers will get better service. But it all comes back to profitability. If the profits are there, there's tremendous growth, you can then plow that back into better customer service, better quality of delivery of service. At the same time, remunerating your shareholders very well and the staff very well. So these are all the virtuous circle that you must pursue. But all of these virtuous circle, they all come through only one thing: must be anchored on true north.
I was listening to Alex Hormozy yesterday, and the reason why I asked this question is because he was describing the cost of change. So naturally, whenever you make a change, in the immediate term, usually any kind of change that you effect will probably cause some form of downturn. Maybe it will be a downturn in terms of efficiency because your teams will have to learn a new skill, whatever it is, or maybe you as a leader will have to spend a bit more time out of your usual work having to convince and corral people to be able to adopt said change. So if you imagine a chart, and to stay the same, you're at this level. To effect a change, he says you have to factor in a 20% cost to it, whether it's time, whether it's efficiency. So you factor in a 20% cost. the change is only worthwhile if you can anticipate that by taking this 20% hit, that there will be a 20% upside as well, so that the hit is worthwhile. His point was that, and I think this goes back to why it's important to anchor on a true north, because if we don't know what we are measuring that 20% upside on, then the danger is that we make one change. Maybe we start to see some of the upside, but because we're not strict about making sure that we get to that 20%, as we start to see some uptick and some improvement, the tendency for leaders and for other people, business owners, is to think, well, actually, this thing seems to be working. Maybe I should start making some other changes as well. And then what you end up happening is you have a dip, you have a little bit of an uptick, but before that can even take full effect, you take another dip because you take another 20% hit to make another change. And before you know it, while you are seeing some uptick, you are actually slightly worse off than if you were to have done nothing at all. And then the further danger is if you make that's assuming that the change that you make actually works. But in most cases, maybe if we don't calibrate, we don't calculate properly, then the change might actually be a bad and a negative change, in which case you create an even steeper decline as well. So I think that's an important place to close, that as we acknowledge that we need to be nimble to be able to change, we need to be very clear on what are the measures of success so that we're changing the right things. Not every change is necessary.
True. You know, Leon, you and I have just interviewed two iconic sports personalities. There's one thing in common that both of them talk about, but we should touch about it right now. That is, they both talk about visualization, the power of standing in the future, visualize it, what it means when you succeed. And that is very powerful. I mean, I didn't realize, I talked about it a lot in business, but when the two of them talk about it, they really visualize it. The moment I'm standing on the podium, receiving it, this is how I'm going to feel like. And so that, I think, should be something that you think about when you are strategizing what you intend to do for your organization. You and I call it standing in the future. Standing in the future to visualize vividly what your organization will look like in the year 2030 or 2040 or 2050, whatever year you put there. The more vivid the description of what the future looks like for you, the more power it allows you to make changes in the present. Because you have to say now, that future is so visual for you. And it is so compelling. You don't even mind the pain, the dip that you're going to go through, the one you described. But you must, because you're anchored on the measure of success, you now know that you cannot be wallowing continuously in the dip. You need to rise above it. So when I talk about portfolio, in businesses that have many different business portfolio, it's very easy to do. Because you can see, this businesses is really making money, and this part of the portfolio I'm investing, it will take a while for it to make money. So you can trade the two together, add the two together, it's okay. But sometimes, even if you're in just one business, say retail, you can also have a portfolio of products that you sell in your retail store. Some products are making money, some products are relatively new in the store that will take a long time for the dip to take place, but the cumulative effect of that portfolio, you're good to go. But I think the power, they say, is the power lies in the future. So if you can stand in the future, then you can look back, managing the present from that future. That's why the power that Nicole David and Josiah Ng, both of them talk about the power of visualization. Very, very important.
Yep. And I think that's a poignant way to end this week's episode. Thank you all for listening to yet another episode of The Game of Impossible. We hope you enjoyed this. If you do, we encourage you to subscribe if you haven't already to both our YouTube as well as Spotify. We upload episodes every Friday at 6 a.m. And we also have short form content on both our IG as well as TikTok at The Game of Impossible. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.